Good morning everyone and welcome to Story Time. Now before we begin, I'm sure you all know that we have to be nice and quiet and not talk to each other so that everyone can follow along with the story. But we've got some very special people with us today who really like a little bit of extra peace and quiet so they can pay attention. So just remember, no talking to each other, just be very nice and still and quiet and everyone can enjoy. Does that sound alright? Now, our book for today is My Grandma Lived in Gooley Gulch by Graham Bass. Shall we begin? Alright. My grandma lived in Gooley Gulch, near Bandy Wallop East, a fair way north of Murrumbun, 500 miles at least, a little west of Lawson's Rest and south of Johnson's Gap, but nowhere much near anywhere. It shows up on the map. Now Gooley Gulch has got a pub, a main street with a hall, a petrol pump that doesn't work, and not much else at all. Except for Grandma, dear old Gran, and this I say with pride. For Gran it was that made old Gooley famous far and wide. There's Gran there. And there we can see Gooley Gulch. There's a cockatoo, lots of emus, not many people. In Sydney and in Melbourne town, they all knew Grandma's name, and all about the animals that Grandma used to tame. And if a stranger came to town, perhaps just passing through, you'd see my Grandma riding by, atop a kangaroo. Or sometimes in a two-wheeled gig, a wombat at the bit, and next to Grandma, in the back, a bandicoot would sit. The townsfolk thought it very odd, but Grandma took no heed. She said that she enjoyed the view upon her hopping steed. And as for training wombats, well, it took no time at all to teach them how to pull a gig and come and go at call. There's Grandma riding a kangaroo, and there she is in her two-wheeled gig with the wombat pulling it. Now Grandma lived just out of town, a mile beyond the pub, down by a little billabong that nestled in the scrub. Upon a hillside, ringed with trees, her rambling mansion stood, a jumbled maze of tin and canvas, bits of string and wood. And from a window out the back, she'd sit and watch galahs fly down beside the pool and drink beneath the evening stars. There's her mansion, looks pretty nice to me. And there are all the galahs. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And there's Grandma. In years gone by, the house was full of birds both big and small. Rosellas, eagles, coots and magpies roosting in the hall. While in the tiny living room, an old goanna sat and played a game of two-up with a dingo and a rat. My Grandma whiled the hours away, conversing with a coot, or listening to the wombat play a tune upon his lute. All the birds. What have we got here? The dingo, the goanna, and the rat playing two-up. That's roaring fire there too. There was a time, the locals say, when emus came to dine, and stood about all evening, drinking eucalyptus wine. They dressed for the occasion, looking rather out of date, and were spreading idle gossip in a less than sober state. But then a frill-necked lizard gave one ancient bird a scare, and the dinner guests all panicked, running madly here and there. Some kookaburras heard the noise and came to watch the show, and laughed so much that Grandma sternly told them all to go. By the time the fuss was over, there was not a guest in sight. But then that's the way with emus. Grandma says they're not too bright. there they all there. There's the eucalyptus wine there. The goanna, giving them the stare. One year, when it was very hot, old Grandma went away and took the wombat with her on a seaside holiday. She didn't go by elephant or on a polar bear. Besides, you ought to know, you don't find elephants up there. She didn't own a camel, and they cost too much to buy. So Grandma bought some goggles and decided she would fly. The eagle wouldn't take them, and the coot was far too weak. But a pelican consented, so they climbed into its beak. And off they flew, quite low at first, then climbing very high. And as they turned towards the sea, the wombat waved goodbye. There's Grandma in the back there, you see, hopping into the pelican's beak. And look at them flying there. My word, that's a mighty big pelican. They flew across the desert sands and over mountains too, until at dusk they reached a place where giant tree ferns grew. The pelican came gliding down to land beside a creek, and Grandma and the wombat climbed down gladly from its beak. And then while the pelican relaxed and Grandma cooked the tea, the wombat wandered down the creek to see what he could see. I think we might see what he could see here. There you go. There's a pelican. There's an echidna and a platypus. I think that might be a lyre bird. There's the wombat, some kingfishers. I think that's a cassowary. The trees were full of creatures with unfriendly, glowing eyes, and giant furry spiders hunted giant furry flies. A baby tree snake slithered by and gave him such a start that poor old wombat turned and fled with terror in his heart. And so they spent the night there, but the wombat stayed awake, looking nervously around him for a wombat eating a snake. You see all the eyes of the creatures there? There might be a possum, there's a spider there. You see the snake? There's his eyes there. When morning came, they journeyed on and reached the sea at last. The rolling waves came crashing in. The tide was running fast. But undeterred, my Grandma donned her frilly bathing gear and dived into the foaming surf without a trace of fear. She sat upon her blow-up horse while Wombat went to sleep. The pelican went fishing where the sea was not too deep. But when the Wombat woke, the tide had carried her away, and no one's seen my Grandma, even to this very day. Oh, look out! The waves are racing away with Grandma there. That's no good. And yet I have a feeling that my Grandma's still alive, having drifted to an island where she'd managed to survive. From there, perhaps, she made her way to England or to Spain, or maybe San Francisco on a Western Railway train. She could be taming tigers in the jungles of Tingor, but I think she's back in Goolagulch, just like before. That's the end of the story. Did everyone enjoy that? Did everyone have a favourite animal? And what about, where's Grandma now, do you think? Is she in England or in Spain or back in Goolagulch? Alright, that's it for today's story time. I hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.